Tonight is March 10th, 2016, and these are some of the stories that are on my mind. Beginning with Crossed. I've been slowly acquiring the individual issues of the Badlands series. I now have most of them, and these are some of the ones I got in the last week or two. This one has a Milo Manada flair to it. This is another one. This is by Garth Ennis. They do have the most interesting covers on Crossed, I have to say. Quite provocative, to say the least. This one is by Jamie Delano from Hellblazer. This is from the Family Values storyline by David Lapham. Another Garth Ennis book. Now, I didn't pay the cover price that you see there. Well, not the cover price, but the sticker says there. I got them for much less than that. But I have to say that the Crossed books are never boring. They're endlessly fascinating and wonderfully grim. I suppose that this was maybe inspired by the film, the Serbian film, which was pulled from a horror festival in England years ago, which was a little bit ironic because it was a horror festival, but apparently the Serbian film was a little bit too, well, horrible. Now, these books, many of these I got for the covers, or in the case of the Black Widow, I was interested in the character and in this story by Mr. Wade. This is a very pretty cover, I think. And one of the dollar bins, I picked up this miniseries called Hit by Bryce Carlson and by Nelson Del Rey, who, to my disappointment, has only done one issue of the Scarlet Witch series. But she did this 4-issue miniseries years ago. Well, to be fair, about just a few years ago. Very provocative covers, I think. Not as probably salacious as Cross, but very nice. That is number 3 and 4. This came out not too long ago. I think this is by Alex Raw. An homage to the Buscema cover. Hellboy. I normally would not have picked this up because I like Mike Mignola's writing with his artwork. When he writes by itself, I've discovered that it's just my preference that I just really enjoy how he draws. But this was an interesting cover, and so I picked it up. And this is the most recent Fight Club with a cover by Bill Sienkiewicz. I have the early issues of Fight Club, but I have not read them. And not too long ago, I saw the film for the first time. Years ago, when the film came out, I saw many young people with the novel. And gave me hope because they were really passionate about reading. But I'm skeptical, and I wonder if they've picked up another novel since then. Neil Adams has been doing some DC covers, and I picked up the ones that I liked. This is Harley Quinn. Although I should say that this Harley Quinn outfit that she has, this roller derby outfit from her current run in the stories, it's not a favorite of mine. Martian Manhunter number 9. Lewis and Clark. Now this is, I suppose, paying respects to George Perez from the New Teen Titans, and Crisis on Infinite Earth, where this is from. Detective Comics, Batman and Robin, and the beautiful Talia, and Ra's al Ghul, a very deeply fascinating character. And of course, where would a comic be without a Kiss and Wonder Woman? Now, regarding Saga, I think I mentioned in one of my earlier videos that I picked up much of the Saga run at a used bookstore. Was it last year, I think? Summer, late last summer. And I've been picking up the singles, but have not read them. Since I've gotten back into comics, Saga has been on the top of the list regarding YouTubers and people that I've met who just love this series. And so I just decided maybe I'll one day pick it up and read it. Now, I read issue number 1. This is a reprint a few weeks ago, and I enjoyed the artwork, and the story was okay. But the dialogue made me think of conversations I've overheard at non-trendy Starbucks. And I don't know what I think about that. I don't know if I like that or not. I have to read many more issues than just the first issue. But I have not picked up issue number 2. So I don't know what that says. But I'll continue to buy it as it comes out, and I guess I'll see. This one came out, I think, last week, The Discipline by Peter Milligan and Leandro Fernandez. I think that's, if I can see that correctly. I read this one, and what it made me think about was those old Cinemax Showtime 1-hour erotica supernatural shows from late night years ago, where they have the provocative European and the sexually frustrated upper middle class woman who finds fulfillment in the macabre or erotica. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but just to remind me of those shows, which are not probably the best of cable TV. I may still pick up issue number 2, but I will see. And I also picked up some CDs, since I'm not going to get a turntable anytime soon. I like Belle and Sebastian. This is Girls in Peace, Time Wanna Dance. They are one of my favorite bands. And the interesting little song here, Enter Sylvia Plath, whose poetry I never liked, but I like the song that they do here. Another artist is from Argentina named Federico Vele, who did this one in Berlin. And the songs are in Spanish and English. And my favorite is Bohemian Rhapsody. Now, someone who does get the erotic right and the supernatural, or the psychological aspects of it, is, of course, Guido Crepax. And I got this last week. This is Valentina, and it collects the Baba Yaga storyline. And I thought it was going to be much bigger, much taller than this, but I got it on Amazon, and you can find it there right now. It was just published in February. And it's $22. Shipping $3.99. And I got it about a week and a half, 2 weeks when I ordered it. Now, someone who does get these type of stories right, of course, is Crepax. And the Baba Yaga storyline is, of course, many of you probably know, is the Baba Yaga is from the Russian folk tales. Is a witch. And in our story, she's trying to seduce and destroy Valentina and her husband, Philip Rembrandt. And no one does psychological horror, I think, in comics better than Crepax. Show you some of the things he's going to put Valentina through. Now, I showed a Harley Quinn comic earlier, and if Crepax was alive, he would be an ideal writer for Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn is unstable at best. And if anybody could probably understand the psychology of someone like that, it would be Crepax. It would certainly be probably one of the most fascinating comics in recent years if Crepax were to do it. Of course, he's not with us anymore. He passed away in 2003. And I doubt Grant Morrison or maybe Neil Gaiman will ever tackle Harley Quinn. But it's unfortunate because she hasn't really had a good writer in many, many years. And again, one day I'm going to do a video on Harley Quinn. But Crepax would be the ideal writer and artist for her. The stories he would come up with would be just endlessly fascinating. So this, I was very happy to get this. The only problem with this is, of course, the binding. I think it's glued. So I have to be very careful with it because I'm afraid if I pull a little bit too hard, it's going to tear. Another book that I got was this one here, History of Mary Nelson by Darren Anderson. This is a new series, a relatively new series, of little paperbacks dedicated to albums. And this one is dedicated to Serge Gainsbourg's book, The History of Melody Nelson, which is about a man who hits a girl with a car and begins a love affair with her in a hotel. If you go on YouTube, they have the whole album on and with videos and with subtitles if you don't speak French, like I do not. But this series here is dedicated to, I think, groundbreaking albums. There's some on David Bowie, on the Smiths, Joy Division. But this is the only one I've read, and I enjoy this. I also picked up Inside Mobius Volume 1. This is a Spanish translation. I have Volume 3. And this is one of the last works Mobius did before he passed. And it's Mobius and his characters. Basically, he's interacting with them. But as I was thumbing through this, I noticed that Osama bin Laden is one of the characters in this comic. And his worst nightmare occurs. He meets a genie. And the genie begins to undress and try to reason with Mr. bin Laden regarding a healthy approach towards women. It doesn't work. So what does she do? She changes his sex and turns bin Laden into a woman, which causes him to faint because it's the most horrible thing you can imagine. And I hope maybe they'll translate these into English at one point. And finally, some books. I've been getting these also the past couple of weeks. I've got these past couple of weeks. Swinburne is one of my favorite poets. This is selected poetry and prose. This is from the modern book editions, which are apparently, I understand, are quite collectible now. Swinburne was an English poet, late 1800s, there's a theme, and I think much of his poetry, of love and death and femme fatales. And also he was an admirer of Baudelaire's Flowers of Evil. And to give you an idea, one of his poems is about a priest who is in love with a woman, and when she passes, he cannot let go of her corpse. Swinburne also wrote a beautiful poem based on the Tristan and Isolde storyline, which Wagner did an opera about. And I believe the Tristan poem was published in the 1860s, which would have been the time that Wagner did his Tristan and Isolde, which is one of my favorite operas, and which I was able to see a long, long time ago in Houston, Texas. But Swinburne is one of my favorite poets. And then there's Notes on the Death of Culture by the Peruvian novelist Mario Vargas Llosa, who's probably one of the last of the great Latin American writers who came into their own in the 60s. That's still alive. I mean, Garcia Marquez passed away, Carlos Fuentes passed away not too long ago. And he did this book called Notes on the Death of Culture, Essays on Spectacle and Society. And when I read this, I just smiled because I kept thinking of not just of Marshall McLuhan, whom he cites, but also Neil Postman and our current political climate, particularly with one particular political party in the United States, and cable television and the approach to news and reality television as a whole. And this gets it just right. And one of the remainder shelves at one of the bookstores, I picked up Fear, a novel, World War I, by Gabriel Chevalier, a writer I've never read, but have an introduction by John Berger. I buy books on World War I. One of the things I find interesting about that war, it's not the war itself, but of the people who fought in it. And years ago, I had read Paul Fussel's book on World War I called I think The War in Modern Memory. And what he talked about there was that the soldiers who fought that war, they were either working class or the officers. One thing they all had in common was poetry, because poetry was part of the education system. And it was not considered feminine or effeminate for the soldiers to know poetry. It actually was expected for the men. It was part of the manliness that they should know some poetry. And so you would have working class people at least knowing some poetry or admiring poets. And of course the officers who had gone to the elite schools. And so that got me quite interested in World War I. And of course the broader and the important aspects of that horrible war. And when I picked this book up, I had just seen The Deer Hunter from beginning to end. And there's a scene in The Deer Hunter when a Green Beret goes to a wedding. Well, he's trying to get to a bar, and he has to go to a wedding. And then Robert De Niro sees him, and De Niro is about to go to Vietnam. And he has this romanticized view of the war. And the Green Beret does not share that opinion. And in the beginning of this book, you have a veteran of the First World War who goes into, I think, a bar or a restaurant. And people there are basically praising him for his heroism, and the man wants nothing of it, because he's just seen some terrible things, and the experience itself has been just atrocious. And in the same vein, Michael Harris Dispatches, I had given my copy away a long time ago, and it got me thinking again about that time period in American history, the Vietnam era. Now, Michael Harris was a co-writer of Apocalypse Now, and Apocalypse Now was, if I'm correct, was inspired by the reporting pieces that Harris did for magazines at the time. And Dispatches is just, you want basically true horror. I mean, it's here. It's a collection of basically stories that he did at the time. Very powerful essays in here. And he did not romanticize war in any way. And it certainly makes you feel for the soldiers that were there, much like the Deer Hunter does. You really, these men and women were put in these terrible situations. Now, this is a Spanish novel by Alfaguara. Alfaguara is just, they have the best covers for novels. I'm always intrigued by the covers they have. And this is by, I think it's a Mexican writer, Federico Trager, called Hace el amor y no la cama, which is make love and not the bed. And this one I strictly got for the cover. And the story, what I've heard, is of a love affair between a ghostwriter and a self-help book writer, which I can only think is going to be quite disastrous. This is by a Colombian writer, Jorge Franco, El Mundo de Afuera. I guess the outside world, or the world outside. And again, they have the best covers in this publication. This one takes place in Colombia in the early 70s, about a little girl whose dad is extremely rich, and they basically live in this on this hill, which the girl imagines to be a castle. And I just mentioned Swinburne and the poem that he wrote on Tristram and Isolde, and the girl is named after Isolde. And Wagner's opera apparently is going to be part of this storyline. So her father's kidnapped at one point, and I guess the girl's fantasy life is just broken apart by the harshness of just the reality of things. And finally, the letters of T.S. Eliot. I got these for like $1, $2. I like Eliot very much. He's a poet I came to respect late in my life. I just ignored him for many, many years. But I picked up Letters, Volume 2, 1923 and 25. And finally, Volume 1, 1898 to 2022, which basically covers the years of the wasteland. And I'd mentioned Apocalypse Now earlier, and Colonel Kurtz, or Marlon Brando in that film, quotes from The Hollow Man, which is one of Eliot's more famous poems. And Eliot's In the Wasteland also alludes to Tristan and Isolde. Now, it's a strange coincidence that all these books came into my buys in the past couple of weeks, but and I was just going through them, I saw all these wonderful connections between them. So there are some of the books from recent weeks, and until next time, and otherwise, thank you very much for viewing.